Hey everyone, I'm Lux, and this is True Crime with Lux. Today I will be talking about the horrific crime of Sophie Lancaster and Robert Maltby. Sophie was born November 26, 1986, to John and Sylvia Lancaster in the Rosendale Borough of Lancanshire, England. The area wasn't the best due to the economy dwindling, and the area was kind of falling apart. But despite all of this, Sophie and her parents, along with her older brother, had a happy life. Sylvia said Sophie was smart and loved reading and wanted to be involved in making the world a better place for everyone. When Sophie started high school, she began changing the way she dressed and started listening to heavy metal. Her mom, who worked with kids, wasn't worried when Sophie changed, saying that it was normal and kids are learning who they are. Sophie soon made friends who shared her same interest and just understood her. She started leaning more into what some would call a goth aesthetic, and her favorite things to wear was a long black leather jacket with lace gloves and lace tops. She started dyeing her hair different colors and getting facial piercings, just really expressing who she was. And her parents were so happy. They were proud of her for feeling comfortable being herself. Sometimes they'd fight like most kids do with their parents, but it was small things here and there, never anything major. During her junior year of high school, Sophie met Robert Maltby. They had an instant connection and shared the same taste in clothes and music. Sophie's family loved him and said they were just a sweet couple. The couple became inseparable, and Sophie became Robert's muse. He would paint portraits of her, and her parents even hung some in their house. He was just so talented. Robert and Sophie had some people around town that weren't okay with them because of their style, but they didn't let that bother them. Sophie also started having problems at school with other kids, mainly girls who weren't a fan of the goth scene. They would treat her like she was weird or an outcast. But Sophie tried not to let it bother her because she knew who she was and she was confident in it. Even still, Sophie and Robert had people that would yell at them and say rude things. Sometimes they would be minor physical altercations. But they continued being themselves and they supported each other. In 2007, the two of them got an apartment together. Robert had just started at Manchester School of Art working on a degree in illustration. Sophie was going to take a year off before going to get her English degree. The two were planning their lives and talking about getting married and their future. That was until it all came to a stop on August 11th, 2007. The day before, on Friday, August the 10th, Sophie and Rob went to hang out with their friend Jonathan. The three were just spending time together and catching up. Sophie and Robert ended up leaving at 11 p.m., and on the way home, they stopped at a store and ran into some people they knew, so they talked for a while. They then started making their way home when around 1 a.m. they ran into some teenagers in the park. Among them was 15-year-old Brendan Harris, 16-year-old Ryan Herbert, brothers Joseph and Danny Holm, who were 16 and 15, and 17-year-old Daniel Mallet. These boys referred to themselves as the Bay Cup Terror Group. They had been drinking all night, so by the time Sophie and Rob came across them, they were all pretty drunk. Rob said he immediately felt nervous when he saw them, and one of the boys came up to ask for a cigarette. Being nice, Rob did stop, but really just wanted to get out of there. When he reached for his pack, one of the boys were overheard saying, "Shall we batter him?" Then, out of nowhere, Brendan stepped forward and slapped Rob in the face. Rob was in such shock, so his reaction was to laugh. This really pissed off the other boys in the group. One of them then kicked Rob in the head, which knocked him to the ground. All of them, at that point, began beating him while he was down. The group laughed and taunted them while they continued kicking Rob. Sophie was yelling at them to stop, and the group then turned on her and started beating her. Other kids around the park were yelling at them to just stop, all in shock at what was happening. The group was now kicking Sophie in the head and jumping on her. The attack only lasted a few minutes, but for Rob and Sophie, it felt like hours. The group then just left like nothing had happened, leaving Rob and Sophie unconscious on the ground. One of the boys had stolen Rob's phone and tried to give it to a kid they saw as they were leaving, bragging about how they had just beaten up 2 people and he should go check it out. The other kids in the park who had witnessed what happened called for help. Police and ambulance were dispatched. It took them a while because they couldn't get an exact location of where they were supposed to go. Meanwhile, Jonathan, the friend that Sophie and Rob were hanging out with earlier, said he got a call at 1:30 from Rob's phone, but no one was on the other end, so he assumed it was an accident. But later he got a call again, and when he answered, the voice on the other end was a teenager. He asked him if he had 2 friends that would be in the park. Then he said that they looked like they were dead before hanging up the phone. So Jonathan rushed to the park and saw the police, but no one would answer him about what was happening. Paramedics were in shock when they had arrived. Sophie and Rob were in such bad conditions they couldn't even tell their gender. They were rushed to the closest hospital where they were stabilized before being transferred to other hospitals for care. They had serious trauma and were unrecognizable. Staff expected them both to recover, though. Rob had internal bleeding along with a brain bleed. Sophie had boot impressions on her face, and the attackers had pulled her hair so hard, she had lost pieces of her scalp. Once they were stable, their friend Jonathan was brought to the hospital to identify Rob, but wasn't able to see Sophie yet. Police thought the attack was motivated by robbery, but after talking to the witnesses, the detectives thought maybe it was due to the way Sophie and Robert dressed. The few teenagers that had witnessed the attack were able to tell detectives the name of some of the boys involved. They soon started rounding up the boys they believed were involved, the first being Ryan Herbert, then Brendan Harris, and a few hours later, they got Daniel Mallett. The next day, they arrested Danny Holm at his parents' house. His brother Joseph turned himself in a few hours later. Monday, August 13th, all 5 were brought in front of the court, where they were charged with 2 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent. On Wednesday, Rob's condition had improved, and he actually woke up from his coma. He was able to go visit Sophie before being transferred to a hospital closer to his parents. Detectives were hoping that Rob would be able to help them understand what had happened that night, but Rob was still confused and didn't remember the attack. He had suffered a lot of brain damage. So they continued investigating and were really interested in why Sophie and Rob had been walking through that park that night. Since they didn't need to in order to go home, when they spoke to Jonathan, he told them it wasn't unusual for them to take a long way home at night because the 2 of them really enjoyed that time. The case was assigned to Detective Inspector Dean Holden, and he knew some of the attackers' names. You see, Ryan was a local menace, known as a bully. He had a pretty large family, and most of them were known by police. Brendan was also a troublemaker, and just a few weeks earlier, he had transferred schools due to his behavior, and had even been banned from certain establishments because of his violence. Joseph and Danny lived at a traveler site in a trailer next to their parents, so they were kind of on their own. Joseph was actually the leader of the group, so no one was surprised he was involved, but his little brother, now that was a surprise. It seemed he was just trying to follow along in his big brother's footsteps. Police were also surprised that Daniel was involved because he was a good student and he didn't have a record or get into trouble. But classmates said that they noticed he was starting to show some violent tendencies lately. Now, back at the hospital, Sophie was on life support for 2 weeks when doctors told her parents that it was time to take her off of it on August 24th, 2007. Her death changed the charges to murder. All 5 of the teenagers denied being involved and blamed the others for the attack. Some even tried to claim they were trying to stop the others from attacking them. Now, the citizens were outraged by this attack, and they blamed the government, saying that that park had become a place for violent teens to hang out, and they needed to have some kind of patrol there late at night if the park was going to be open. Others blamed the parents of the teens because why were they even allowed to be out alone that late at night? But regardless of anything you believed or who you wanted to blame, everyone agreed it was proof of a national problem from what they had called disgruntled youths. People wanted things to change, to prevent things that happened to Sophie and Rob from happening to anyone else. After the death of her daughter, Sylvia created a program called Stamp Out Prejudice, Hatred, Intolerance Everywhere. The acronym spelled Sophie. She did this all the same year of losing her daughter. Meanwhile, police continued doing interviews of over 100 witnesses. It took a while since the witnesses were mostly underage, so they had more steps they had to take in order to question them. But they were able to build a good case against the boys, and in July of 2008, they were brought to court and all pleaded not guilty to the charge of murder and not guilty of grievous bodily harm for Rob and Sophie. Now, Daniel and the Holmes brothers were actually allowed out on bond and were given into the custody of their parents, who obviously have proven they're not able to control their children. They were given a 9 p.m. curfew, like that would be allowed. They were given a 9 p.m. curfew. Like they shouldn't be allowed out at all, let alone having a curfew at 9 p.m. Like the trouble that they could cause. I don't understand that one. Now, Ryan and Brendan were not given bail. Since they were all underage, their names were supposed to be redacted, but the town knew these boys and the violence they were capable of, so their names were all over the media. The trial was set to begin on March 10th. The pre-trial was in February, and Inspector Holden made a statement saying this was the most horrendous crime he had ever seen in 14 years. He described the boys as feral and explained that Sophie and Rob did nothing to provoke this attack. Even the parents of these boys were just as horrendous. They laughed at the charges against their children and even tried to give false alibis for them. When the trial officially began, they had collected DNA evidence from the pants of Ryan Herbert that matched Sophie and Rob's blood. So Ryan soon changed his plea to guilty on both counts. The judge reminded him that changing his plea would be getting a life sentence. His defense attorney said that he takes full responsibility of his actions and accepts the consequences. So he was charged and taken back to prison. The other four soon changed their plea to guilty for the charges of the attack on Rob, but not for the murder of Sophie. Due to the evidence, the only person they could actually charge for Sophie's murder was Brendan Harris. Brendan's murder trial began on March 12th of 2008. After all of the witness testimony and the evidence they had gathered, he was found guilty by the jury. All 5 of them returned to court on April 28th, 2008 for their sentencing. Daniel Mallet was only given 4 years and 4 months for grievous bodily harm of Rob and Sophie. Joseph and Danny Holm were given a minimum of 5 years and 10 months. Ryan Herbert and Brendan Harris were given 2 life sentences for the murder of Sophie and causing grievous bodily harm. Brendan has to serve a minimum of 18 years, while Ryan has to serve a minimum of 16 years and 3 months since he did plead guilty. They were both given the additional 5 years for the attack on Rob. In the years since, Brendan has tried to appeal his sentence in 2016 and 2020. Both have been denied. He has shown no improvement. He has taken no responsibility for his actions. So the court and the judge agreed that he is not to be let out. Ryan appealed in February of 2020, and it was actually considered because he was making progress in jail. He was furthering his education, even going for a law degree. and in March of 2020, he was granted conditional release. After all of this, Rob has continued to move forward in his life. He got his degree, he was able to finish school, and he has met a woman online, and he is looking forward to meeting up with her and continuing his life. But to this day, he still feels like their attack had nothing to do with how they looked or what they were wearing. That these questions should not be aimed towards him or Sophie. That these questions of why this happened, what provoked this, should be asked of these teenagers to answer. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope everyone has a great day and stays safe out there. And I'll be talking to you all next week.